welcome to Tech Latest from Nikkei Asia, where we bring you the freshest updates from the technology sector in Asia. I'm your host, Katey Creel, and this week I'm joined by top tech correspondent Annie Cheng Ting-Fang in Taipei, and we're talking about why now is a terrible time to be a manager in the tech supply chain. Welcome to the show, Annie.
Thank you very much, Katey. I'm very glad to be back to the show.
It's always great having you. So recently, not recently, you're always very busy, but recently you've been especially busy on a series of stories about how runaway demand for AI computing power is having this just incredible knock-on effect throughout the tech industry. Not just demand for AI chips is up, but everything that even kind of tangentially touches onto it. So to sum it up briefly for listeners, everyone obviously wants NVIDIA GPUs, but to make those GPUs, you need everything that goes into them. And one of the most important of those supporting parts is advanced memory, or high bandwidth memory. Now, Annie, you've been covering the AI boom intensely from the very start. When did memory first emerge as a bottleneck for production? And why? Can't companies like Samsung and SK Hynix just churn out more of it?
The short answer is this. Even if companies like Samsung and SK Hynix are expanding capacity today, it's usually take 1 to 2 years before that new supply really reach the market. But the shortage isn't a future problem. It's happening right now.
Right.
So it's still a mismatch. So first, to understand why, I think we have to look at what memory really does. Almost every electronic devices needed. One type that we hear a lot about is DRAM. DRAM is inside your phones, computers, TVs, game consoles. It temporarily stores the data you've actively using, so your device can respond instantly when you click, scroll, or type. In many ways, DRAM directly determines how fast and responsive a device feels. And NAND flash, we also hear a lot, is your storage. That's where your photos, videos, and files are saved. The key challenge is that memory chips overall are made by only a small number of major suppliers, mainly Samsung, SK Hynix, Micron for DRAM, and Kioxia, Samsung, SK Hynix, SanDisk for NAND.
And is that because memory chip normally isn't a very high margin product, so it doesn't make sense for everyone in the world to be getting into making them, and that's why only a few companies have specialized in them?
So just because over the past few years, we know that memory is always quite volatile. Like when demand suddenly shifts, industry simply can adjust overnight. So memory is always been a quite volatile market. So if you recall, most consumer electronics were relatively slow over the past few years, but AI computing clearly stood out. So all these memory chip makers were relatively cautious when it comes to expansion over the past few years. And this time, the demand isn't coming from a consumer directly. It's coming from biggest tech companies in the world. NVIDIA, Google, Amazon, Meta, all racing to build massive AI data centers. And these data centers need tens of thousands of components. And memory is absolutely critical. For example, we discuss a lot HBM or high bandwidth memory, which stack a lot of layers of DRAM chips together and consume a huge amount of DRAM capacity is one. But data center needs other types of DRAM as well, DDR, GDDR, and on top of that, AI inference require enormous amount of storage. That is NAND flash memories. So memory have moved from being a supporting component to a key bottleneck now. And because supply is now quite concentrated as well, and expansion take time, this AI-driven surge is really reshaping the entire memory market.
I see. So that kind of answers my next question about why AI demand is affecting production of not just AI applications, but it's also impacting lower-end smartphones, washing machines, cars, other things in the tech supply chain, right? Because, as you mentioned, every electronic device uses memory.
Yes, one of my friends work at a very large memory chip company. He told me something really interesting that NVIDIA alone has already booked several times more memory than what many smaller consumer electronic companies combined will buy in the entire year. And NVIDIA is not the only one. Many of these buyers after NVIDIA are companies in the global top 20 by market value. So if you are a small company making computers, smartphones, game consoles, TVs, or set-top boxes, it become extremely hard to compete with them just to get access to enough memory. Think about it this way. The data centers these big tech companies are building cost millions, even billions of US dollars. But a consumer gadget might sell for only $500 USD or even
Mm.
less. So when memory prices rise so sharply, smaller device makers simply can't afford to compete with these tech giants. So, and today, in addition to that, top memory chip makers are clearly prioritizing big AI related customers. Why? One industry executive put it very simply. He said, once you've had Wagyu beef and king crab, you don't really want to go back to ordinary beef.
Right.
So that's why major memory chip makers tend to focus on small number of large, high value customers rather than managing dozens of smaller ones.
Right, going for the prime cuts.
Yeah, it's simpler, more
Yeah,
profitable.
that makes
Yeah,
a
and
lot of sense.
significantly more efficient for their resources.
So as a smaller company, even if you happen to have the money, which I know many of them don't, but even then you'd still probably be pushed to the side because you're just not big enough. You're just not quite, you're not NVIDIA, basically.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of pain points in the tech supply chain right now, like for sure. But there's also, adversity can also bring opportunity. And with the established memory makers, they're already straining or even failing to meet demand. They're having to tell, some customers to get to the back of the line. Are there any new players coming in? Well, obviously, like in the mining market, when prices of copper go up, everyone starts opening new mines. Can that happen in memory, or is there just too many hurdles to make that feasible?
Yes, I would say that existing suppliers are hoping this AI driven super cycle can last as long as possible. But because of painful lessons that we discussed from the past, they are being much more conservative and cautious when it comes to expanding capacity. That said, this time around, the global memory crunch driven by AI demand has created a real opportunity for emerging Chinese memory chip makers. The two most notable players are Changxin Memory Technologies, or CXMT, which focuses on DRAM, and Yangtze Memory Technologies, or YMTC, China's top NAND flash memory producer, similar in positioning to Kyosha in Japan. So, but the both companies didn't appear overnight. Both of them founded around 2016 with the goal of filling in the major gap. At the time, China had no homegrown memory chip makers. So
Oh,
from the beginning, they did hire experienced engineers and executives from Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, bring in decades of industry know-how. They've had
mm,
up days and down days. Now it's already 10 years later. So they've already reached a point where they are expanding again and they see strong demand primarily from China's massive domestic market, but also clearly opportunities to gain market share globally. So you can see several factors actually working in their favor. First, China has enormous local demand to push for localization, especially following the US China tech tension, have
right.
encouraged many Chinese companies to turn to domestic suppliers And the second, the current supply shortage create a friendly environment for new players. They don't need to compete aggressively on price. Instead, they can focus on securing customers and building market share. And in some cases, even overseas customers are turning their head to them simply because market is so undersupplied right now.
They have no other choice. Yeah, it's interesting. The political and the economic factors are kind of pushing in the same direction now. It really is, what's a positive version of a perfect storm of just kind of tailwinds for Chinese memory makers.
Exactly.
So that's really good, growth opportunity for them. But as you mentioned, their memory chip market is only about a decade old. They've had to overcome or try to overcome U.S. export controls and other restrictions. What will be the limiting factor or factors for China as it tries to gain even more ground in the memory market?
Yes. I hope to talk a bit about their expansion plan. So, according to Nikkei Asia's exclusive reporting, CXMT is now expanding production in Shanghai, which is 2 to 3 times bigger than its home base in Hefei. And also, they are building plan for HBM in Shanghai as well. CSMT is no longer a negligible player like it was a few years ago. Today, it's already world's fourth largest DRAM chip maker after Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron.
And that's amazing that in just a decade they managed to go from not existing to fourth in the world.
Yes, and now they hold more than 10% of market share by output. So, with its ongoing expansion combined with global supply crunch, its role in the memory supply chain is likely to become even more solid going forward. Already, all the notable Chinese companies are its clients: Alibaba Cloud, ByteDance, Tencent, Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, Lenovo. And also about their NAND maker, YMTC is also building its third plant in Wuhan, targeting 2027 production. The notable part is that YMTC not only making NAND right now, they has decided to put 50% of its new plant capacity into making DRAM, as DRAM is even more constrained. And they are partnering with a local partner to build HBM that is cut off from the US. So, and then YMTC in the NAND market is also a meaningful global player today. Its market share is close to companies like Micron, SanDisk, and SK Hynix. In fact, YMTC was once qualified and verified by Apple. Just that partnership did not move forward because YMTC was placed on the US trade blacklist.
I remember that.
Yes. So, but the verification itself already demonstrated the quality of its products.
Right. And I think once the global players kind of lose their Chinese clients to, Chinese memory chip makers, it'll be probably very hard for them to get that back. I think now that YMTC, CXMT have proven that they are, really viable memory chip makers, and they've got the Alibabas and the Tencents as clients. There's not really much incentive for Alibaba or Tencent or whoever to go back to foreign supplies. So that seems like quite a coup for the Chinese chip makers.
Yes, but still, I agree that, like you said, there might be some limiting factor. I agree that export control has slowed China down, and I think they could continue to be a constraint. But because if you are able to build a production line using the most advanced tools and chemicals, there are little incentive to rely on second best alternatives. And also,
right.
when it comes to HBM, you need to stack advanced DRAMs together. So Chinese players will likely remain a few generations behind. But like what we discussed, for mainstream memory products, standardized DRAM or NAND flash memories used in consumer electronics, and even in areas like industrial, automotive, and servers, they can gradually move into those markets. And
Mm.
at this point, I think China already reached the economic scale because 10% of global market share is really something.
Yeah.
And that need to mass produce these components, you can see their market share. It's already quite outstanding.
Mm.
So from what I understand, memory manufacturing, both DRAM and NAND, it also more standardized than logic chip production that make it relatively easier to ramp up volume production once the process are mature.
Mm.
So on top of that, I still think that some decoupling is still happening. So one clear limitation I can think is that US is likely to restrict the use of Chinese memory chips in some national security critical applications and possibly in some products sold to the US market. But I don't expect the restrictions to go much further than that.
Mm.
I don't think a lot of regions and countries out there will broadly prohibited their companies from using Chinese memory chips. So overall, it's still good opportunity.
Yeah. That makes sense that, even if they're not filling the shortage at the very top end of the market, they're still Chinese makers are still fulfilling a really important need for chips, midway down, lower down. So
Yes, like China's domestic market alone would already make enough to sustain the country's leading memory chip makers.
which in turn sustains its smartphone makers and device makers, because as you also reported recently, even Apple is having trouble securing or worried about, securing enough memory chips. So this is becoming just, a really massive, massive crunch.
Yes, exactly.
So this is the crunch for now. This is the situation for now with, AI investment is still running hot. Companies like Meta and Microsoft are still throwing tens of billions of dollars into, AI infrastructure and clouds. But nothing lasts forever. And especially in the memory chip market, we know there's ups followed by often very sharp downs. So prices are up, hundreds of thousands of percent now. But what do you think might happen once the shortages are resolved? We do have, Samsung, for example, is trying to expand some capacity. I think SK Hynix is as well. How bad do you think the crash in prices might be? And what will happen next once it swings from undersupply to oversupply?
I think some industry executives are actually quite optimistic this time.
Oh,
Their view is that this demand is real, and
mm.
importantly, is not just replacing existing demand, it's coming on top of it.
Oh, that's a good
So you
point.
can see that confidence across the supply chain. For example, TSMC has announced its largest ever capital spending plan with
Mm.
investments up to 56 billion USD this year, mainly to support massive AI related demand. So this is not isolated to memory. The entire ecosystem is moving.
Mm.
Because of that, most people aren't too worried about the memory market through 2026 and even some through 2027. The build-out and the deployment of AI infrastructure are still very much ongoing. But when you look further out to 2028 and beyond,
Mm.
uncertainty increases. The key question then becomes whether AI computing, like you said, remains sustainable over the longer term. So overall, I still think memory markets and industry has always been volatile. If we eventually see oversupply, price can fall so sharply, and mid-size and smaller players could once again face quite serious pressure. That's
Mm.
why during a strong cycle like this, I think companies need to think carefully about differentiation, how to stand out, build unique strength, and position themselves so they can survive even after the cycle cools.
That's really good advice. Do you think, generally speaking, the memory chip market has kind of learned this lesson over, we've had several cycles over the decades and years. Do you think they are acting a bit differently before, or do you think we're going to see a repeat of history eventually?
So over the past 2 years, actually AI is already super good, but most of the major chip makers don't want to expand so quickly.
So maybe they have learned.
So you can see they hope the party can last as long as possible. And they hope that this time the change is more structural, meaning that the overall demand is really increasing massively rather than they need to compete. The pie become bigger, so they don't worry
right.
that more people are coming for the pie. So they hope in the future the adjustment or the down cycle would be more mild. I think
Right.
that's their hope, but we will see how that all play out.
And I'm sure you'll be giving us the earliest looks at that in your reporting, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, I would encourage all of you to take a look at our exclusive reporting on memory chips, both this week and last week. It should be very helpful for understanding what's really driving the industry right now.
They are super insightful deep dives, and we'll provide the links for that in the podcast page. Thank you so much, Annie. It's always so much fun talking to you.
Thank you very much, Katey.
That's all for this week's episode. For more of Nikkei Asia's tech coverage, visit asia.nikkei.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly Tech Asia newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. Thanks again for listening, and check back with us next week for more updates on the tech trends that matter.